So I'm a child of God in recovery from drugs and alcohol, and my name is Mike. I was born in 1965 to a middle-class family, normal middle-class family, right? And at age 8, I was molested by a family member. Around this same time, my father was diagnosed with leukemia, so I kept the abuse to myself. It lasted for a couple of years, and around the same time, my father passed away. And actually, the phone rang at 20 minutes to 1 on March 3rd, and I answered the phone at 10 years old and was informed that my dad had just passed. I was on Ritalin for being hyper, and so I started self-medicating. I noticed my mom drinking every day until she passed out after my father had passed. She cared for us. She was a school teacher for 35 years. She took great care of us, but she had her own hurts, hangups, and habits. And we didn't talk about that stuff back then. So as a good codependent, I would help make her drinks in the evening. So I'd make her a little bourbon and water or vodka and orange juice, and I'd sip a little bit of that. Well, she'd always remind me, hey, did you take your medication today? And she'd put my little Ritalin in those little church envelopes we used to get. And I found a couple times when I'd saved them, I thought, well, I better take it, right? So I take that, and then I got to take my afternoon one, and then a couple sips off of her drink, and I started feeling the effects. And what this did for me is it started numbing some of those childhood hurts. You know, the kid that didn't have a father on the block. I never played catch with my dad. We never threw a football, a baseball, because of his disease. He would bruise so bad. Around age 16, I smoked pot for the first time. And that night was the first time in my life I ever felt normal. All those hurts, all that pain, all the childhood memories that I had, they were gone. I was normal as like everybody else. I was loaded. I actually told the guy who came to my house that night, I said, hey, get me a sack of that. And from that day on, for the next 26 years, I smoked marijuana every day. I also used cocaine and meth, but mainly on the weekends because I liked to party, so I had a job every day. At age 17, a boss of mine, who was like a father figure, this guy was a great guy, I got a phone call at home that he had passed away from a massive heart attack. And so there again, there was another man ripped out of my life, father figure. And so I did what any good addict in denial does, is I started drinking and using even more. I was that guy that would go to a party and get drunk, not just drink. I dated a girl in high school. She was 15 and she was pregnant, and she had a son, and so we started dating. She had the baby's daddy was in jail. We played house for a couple of months, and he was getting out of jail. And I remember that letter that she got from him saying that he really wanted to reconcile. And so I wasn't going to stand in the way of a father not being with his child. So we agreed that it would be best if we split. So we remained friends, but we split up. But quickly, I fell in lust with another woman who had 2 kids, who was 5 years older than me, and she had just gone through a divorce. So this looked like a perfect project for me, right? I could be that dad to those kids, I could take care of her. But before all that started, I entered into a 30-day drug and alcohol treatment center called the Care Unit in Oxnard. At 18 years old, I was addicted to alcohol, drugs, because I used every day and my life was way unmanageable. But I got out and made a deal with my wife after about 3 months that she could drink if I could just smoke pot, and I just wouldn't drink, and I would just like manage my addiction. And so that's how that went. About 2 years into our marriage, in December, she was in a severe automobile accident where she was hit head on and broke her brain stem. So I was called to the hospital, and I got to the hospital, and we went through all the different things with the neurologist. And after a couple of days, I was given the option by the neurologist from UCLA whether to let her live as a vegetable or pull the plug. So at age 21, her parents, who were divorced, both said, oh, this is your call. You're her husband. And take it, we'd only been married for 2 years. And so I made that choice to remove her from life support. She passed away on December 19th. We buried her on December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, and her 2 daughters went back to live with their dad, and there I was, completely alone again. So I turned back to drugs and alcohol. Now I picked up the alcohol. And happy are those who are spiritually poor, Matthew 5:3. We just read that. And that's where I was. That girl that I dated in high school came to the funeral. My mom told her, give him a week or so and give him a call. And so she did. And the following year we were married. She then also had a daughter from the same relationship. I adopted both of those kids to be my own because her father was not present in their life. And here I was on a mission again. We also had a daughter together. My drinking and drug use had kind of slowed down to what I considered a manageable amount. And manageable for me was I only drink on days that ended in Y, and I only used on days that ended in Y. I was that guy that would buy 2 6-packs, put one in the refrigerator and one in the garage, and as I drink one out of the refrigerator, I put one back in. And so it looked like I only drank 6. I got real involved in youth sports because I wanted to be that super dad. So I was coaching Little League. I was coaching Pop Warner football, and I don't just get a little involved. I became the president of both of the organizations, umpire for District 63 in Central California. But one thing I did find in youth sports is that there's a lot of lonely people in youth sports, and those are the parents. And so my wife didn't like to drink a lot, and we would have these little things I called hoo-haws at my house. And one night, I ended up having an affair with a woman who I was really good friends with her husband. That's where our addiction takes us, right? And we don't care. We just don't care. Our spiritual being inside of us just doesn't care. So it just about destroyed our marriage. I promised I would stop drinking. I promised I would go to church. And I was working for an oil company at the time, and I was able to take a move to Bakersfield because they don't have drugs or alcohol in Bakersfield. And so I went up there, and I thought, well, I'm good now, right? I'm out of my element. I don't have a plug up here. I'm going to be good. So it says, let us examine our ways and test them and return to the Lord. Lamentations 3:40. I did manage to stay sober for about 6 years, but I was still smoking pot every day. I actually found some up there. And drug testing became prevalent around that time. And so it made sense for us to sell our brand new custom home in Bakersfield that we had paid for and drive and move back to Ventura and live in a little 400 square foot room addition on the back of my mother-in-law's house because I could get loaded. That made sense to me. That's where the insanity of the addiction takes you. Beautiful house, beautiful swimming pool, all those nice things, but I couldn't use dope there because I was getting drug tested. So I came back and we started going to a church in Ventura that had Celebrate Recovery. And Celebrate Recovery was fairly new at this time. We were one of the only ones in Southern California up in that area. But I would just go for this part. I would go for the music and for the testimonies and the lessons, and then I would go home and get loaded because I wasn't as bad as you guys. I had it together, man. My using, I still went to work. Everything was all right. My mother-in-law became really sick. She had cancer. She had battled. And so my wife went across town to take care of her. And we're talking like the way you guys are down here, like across the street, but it was like 3 or 4 miles away. After about 6 months, one of my friends pointed out to me that my wife had actually left me. And I'm like, no, she hadn't left me. She's over at her mom's. I talked to her, a couple times a week, and he took me into our room and showed me all of her clothes in the closet and all of her makeup and her toothbrush and her toothpaste and her shampoo, everything still at the house. This is where I went deep into my addiction. Because here I was all alone. Everything that I had built, right? Everything that I had orchestrated was gone. And I just found myself diving deeper and deeper into my addiction. On my 40th birthday, July 21st, 2005, I thought everybody was going to throw me this big, huge party because I was that guy, right? I knew thousands of people from youth sports and this and that, and the community was really active, and they're going to have this huge party for me, and nothing happened. And so about 8 o'clock that night, I called a friend. Well, let me tell you, a connect, and I said, hey, get as much dope as you can, bring some ladies over. There's a party in my house. It's my birthday. We're like throwing me a birthday party. And so they all came over, and we partied for a little while, and they were normies. They wanted to go home at like 11 or 12, and I was still ready to keep going. So late that night, after everybody left me, I mean, they didn't want to leave. There was dope still, and they wanted to leave, and I couldn't get that. So desperate. My garage is where I like to hang out and party. I went into my garage, and I had a workbench and a stool there, and I found some coax cable, and I tied that around my neck about 3 times and up over the rafters, and I climbed up on a stool, and I was ready to be done. Problem is, God wasn't ready for me to be done. I didn't have the guts to do it, but I'm going to give him the glory and say that it wasn't the guts, it was God. The problem was I couldn't untie that stuff. And so I kept pulling and tugging and pulling and tugging, just making it tighter. And after about 2 hours, I was able to get myself released from it. And I ended up with 2 bruises around my neck. And even in Ventura in July, it's still hot. We don't normally wear hoodies. And so I had to wear a hoodie for a couple of weeks to cover up those lines. I went back to that Celebrate Recovery so the next day I went to my mother-in-law's house, and I was still loaded, and she gave me a couple of Valiums, and so she said, well, this will help you if you're going to quit drinking, and because she had a pill for everything. And so my actual clean date is July 24th, 2005. I went into one of those small groups, and that night I went in a small group with the men, and there was about 6 guys in there, and they all shared. And I heard guys talking about going skydiving and doing all this fun stuff in recovery. I just wanted that obsession to be lifted. I wanted to wake up and not be dope sick every morning. I puked every morning. I had the shakes. I had to drink. I had to get loaded. I just wanted that to go away. But I shared all those deep, dark secrets with the guys. And I felt this thing lifted off my shoulders. It says, happy are the pure in heart. You know, I got a sponsor. I got into service. I also started going to secular recovery. I started going to NA, and that ended up being my fishing pool. That ended up being the pond in which I drew people to Celebrate Recovery. But I started going to Celebrate Recovery on a regular basis, and actually I was part of planting 4 other Celebrate Recoveries in Ventura County. My wife came home from her mom. Her mom had passed away, and my wife came home, and she actually we started going to marriage counseling. We started working on a relationship. You know, it says, openly examine and confess my faults to myself, to God, and to someone I trust. And that's principle 4. This is where it gets kind of tough, because today's a very special day. 5 years ago today, I was up at Gorman riding dirt bikes with my wife and with my youngest daughter. And my son that I had adopted, he was battling addiction. He was 26 years old. I got a phone call from his baby mama that he had not come over and picked up one of his daughters to get school supplies. And so I sent someone over to my house to check on him because he was staying at my house while we were gone. I had left him with $8 to go buy school supplies for his daughter to start school. And it was actually my cousin that lived across the street, and he went over and he called me and said that Mike was on the floor with a needle in his arm. I asked him, call me back in about 5 minutes, because I had to think of how am I going to tell my wife that her son was dead. He called me back and hung up, and I acted like I was on the phone, and then I told my wife. We immediately loaded everything we had, and we drove back with a police escort all the way back to Ventura. When I turned down my street, I had a 40-foot fifth wheel in a big truck, and when I pulled down my street, There were 75 people, reminds me of tonight, standing in front of my house. They were from recovery and from my church. See, God doesn't waste a hurt. It says, happy are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. For the first time, I used CR instead of my old coping mechanisms. Now, for a moment on that way back, I thought about getting loaded. But I made another phone call, and it was to a guy in CR, and he orchestrated all of that. Oh. And so a couple years later, my wife and I adopted my son's 2 kids because their mom was in her addiction. But I'm happy to say today their mom has over 5 years clean. My oldest granddaughter is 21 years old, and she's a senior at California Baptist University studying nursing. And my son's youngest daughter, Emma, has special needs. She's a child of a substance abuse mom, and she has cerebral palsy, but she's my life. All that kid knows is love. She doesn't know anything else. And 2 weeks ago, she was with her mom, and there was an accident, and she knocked her 2 front teeth out. But today she went to, we called it college, but it's a continuation because she just finished high school last year, and she went to school. And she's an amazing testimony of what recovery can do for somebody else. See, we were told when we adopted her that she'd live to be 7. She'd never walk, she'd never talk. And she's going to be 18 tomorrow. And it was the day that she was born that I celebrated 30 days. And that day I was the first one to hold her. And that's when I went into a therapist, and I had shared about being molested. It was the first time in 40 years that I'd shared that with anybody. You know, those secrets will haunt us. We're only as sick as our secrets. And so if you have secrets, get a sponsor, find an accountability partner. It doesn't have to be in a large group like this, but get rid of that stuff, man. It will haunt you. My wife had always struggled with back pain. She had an injury out of high school from softball, and back in the 80s and 90s, doctors liked to prescribe a lot of narcotics, codeine, Vicodin, that type of stuff. And my wife always managed all of that stuff. You know, she was always a great stay-at-home mom. She started a career in finance. But she had an older sister that had struggled with heroin, and her sister would come to our house from time to time. One day I happened to find a little piece of foil in my house that was burned, and I knew what that was. And so I went upstairs, woke my wife up. I said, this is what I found. Your sister's no longer allowed at our house. I won't have drugs in my house. You know what I do. I mean, I do recovery. Like, this just can't happen. And I was adamant, and my wife said, stop. It's not my sister's. I'm like, well, then whose is it? And she said, it's mine. And I've been trying to find a way to tell you that I need help. And I was powerless. I was absolutely powerless. I've helped numerous men in recovery, and I didn't know what to do. So I called one of our ministry leaders, a female, and I said, I need help, and come over here. And those women helped my wife and walked my wife down the road of recovery. And today my wife has over 6 years clean and sober. She is a ministry leader. She's absolutely amazing. She's putting on an event on the 31st in Ventura. It's Overdose Awareness Day, and she's huge in our community as far as that goes. And then I had the ultimate pleasure of her and I sharing our testimony in New Bern, North Carolina, at the Casting Crowns concert in front of 4,300 people, and telling our story. You know, we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. This was step 5. And so, you know, even it being the same drug that took our son out, it was, you know, time for me to work the steps again and work through that stuff. And, you know, it's just amazing to see what things have done. Like I said, she's done over 4 step studies. She leads women, and it's absolutely amazing. We're going to celebrate because I know we are. We're going to celebrate 35 years of marriage this coming March. we were asked years back if we would become ministry leaders at Grace Church in Ventura, and it's actually one of the Celebrate Recoveries that I helped plant. And my wife came to me. I came to her and said, "Babe, they want us to be ministry leaders of this." Like, and she said, "Oh, you got to be kidding me!" Like, I'm new in my recovery. I don't know. And then all of a sudden, one day, she came to me and said, "Now I know we've gone through everything that we've gone through, all the hurts and hang-ups and habits. Is that there's nothing that we've gone through that we can't help somebody else in their recovery." Again, like I said, God doesn't waste a hurt, man. God is amazing. Happy are the pure in heart, Matthew 5:8. My life verse is Proverbs 3:5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. Always acknowledge him and he will make your path straight. If you're new tonight, I have a few scriptures that I carry with me everywhere I go. These are the answers to all my problems. Oh. When you say it's impossible, God says all things are possible. Luke 18:27. When you say I'm too tired, God says I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. When you say nobody loves me, God says I love you. John 3:16 and John 4:13. When you say I can't go on, God says my grace is sufficient. 2 Corinthians 12:9 and Psalms 91:15. When you say I can't figure things out, God says I will direct your steps. Proverbs 3:5 and 6. When you say I can't do it, God says I can do all things. Philippians 4:13. When you say I'm not able, God says I am able. 2 Corinthians 9:8. If you're new here tonight, man, jump in somebody's pocket. Follow what somebody else does. Okay, this program is not meant to be done alone. Get in a step study. Work the steps. Get a sponsor. And when you get this thing, keep giving it back. That's what you do. When I got 15 years, I dedicated from 15 to 20 years, and I just celebrated 18 years. I just dedicated these next 5 years to service, and it's amazing. I mean, I'm going to a meeting almost every night of the week. I do a meeting on Monday nights. On Tuesday nights, I have the pleasure with Dan, my road dog, of taking meetings into the Ventura County Rescue Mission. And we were there last night, and we had 26 guys out of 40 guys that are in the mission in there, sitting there intensely and seeing what's going on in recovery. And I love that the Dream Center has a meeting here. This is amazing because when you guys leave an inpatient place, you need a place to go, And I don't know about you guys, but I didn't get loaded just one day a week, so I go to a meeting every day. On Wednesday nights, we do step studies in Ventura County. On Thursday night, I go to a meeting. On Friday night, I go to a meeting. And I do church on Sunday. And, I noticed they announced about a church. I just want to emphasize that being involved in a church is a vital part of your recovery. It really is, man, because people in church, they notice who we are. Okay, we're different. There's something about us in recovery. We're different. But we're a light to those that are wounded. They say that, in a church, 10% of the people in a church end up in a Celebrate Recovery. The other 90 are still in Egypt, and so we need to move those people into recovery. We need to help those people. I was just asked about 4 months ago to be an elder in my church. And these people, they know me. They know who I am. They know my past, right? But a couple of years ago, we did a virtual summit during the pandemic at our church, and our pastor came. He sat up in the sound booth around the sound booth for us. That afternoon, when we nailed stuff on the cross, our pastor came and nailed stuff on the cross. And today he's one of the members of our Celebrate Recovery. Out of the 6 elders in our church, 5 of them come to Celebrate Recovery. So I was honored to be on the elder board of our